Thank you for auditing the Always Positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who constantly asks, who the hell is Jack Antonoff? I'm going to be reviewing his solo album with his band Bleachers, Take the Sadness Out of Saturday Night. But if you've been a viewer of my channel, you know that I often ask the question, who the hell is Jack Antonoff? I review basically everything he's put out over the last 2 years since I started paying attention to music, okay? We're talking all this stuff, his recent singles with Lorde and his albums with St. Vincent and Taylor Swift and Clairo and Lana Del Rey. And I just find myself so confused that this person has such an insane influence on American pop music, on world pop music, and very few people know his name. The fact that he's not a household name is kind of a travesty. The fact that Max Martin is considered a great star maker compared to Jack Antonoff is kind of absurd. This guy, along with Kanye and Phineas, who are all coming out with albums this week, are just really doing a lot to push music forward. But here's the thing, I started this channel in 2018, and I didn't pay attention to music in between 2002 and 2018. So because of that, I never listened to Fun. I haven't listened to any of Jack Antonoff's solo work. So this is an experiment, can I figure out who he is as an artist beyond as a producer just from this one project? I was thinking about it, and someone asked me once, who would you want to have dinner with? Like any musician, living or dead. Living. Obviously not dead. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, Paul McCartney, but he'd just talk about himself, and Kanye, but he'd, do something weird and leave. I was trying to think about who would I actually want to have dinner with, and I bet Jack Antonoff would probably be the most interesting person, someone who's been in the music industry, who has so many stories, but also seems so affable and interesting to talk to. So what is this album? I'm going to get into it. Before I get into it in sort of specifics, I will say, I don't like it half as much as Daddy's Home. I don't like it half as much as the Taylor Swift albums he did. I like it about as much as the Clairo album. I put it sort of in there, but I don't think that's what really matters. What I really like seeing is that the people who he collaborates with, they lift him up in the same way that he lifts them up. So it's a really nice kind of symbiotic relationship there, when Brian Wilson would produce other people, right? It was just Brian Wilson producing like Brian Wilson produces, and they just happen to be singing. What's so special about Jack Antonoff is the way that he is so capable of adapting to different styles. So what is he when he's on his own? Well, if you can see behind me, there's a little spoiler. The thing I didn't understand, the main thing I didn't understand is I always thought of him as a Brooklyn guy, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, super hipster, super millennial looking guy, right? Every picture that I've seen, right? But that's not what he is. He's not Brooklyn. He's New Jersey. And with that in mind, everything came a lot more clear to me. New Jersey, which is the state equivalent of, inferiority complex, right? An amazing, interesting state that has produced so much vital culture for our society, but yet that always feels like it has something to prove, always kind of takes on that spirit of Bruce Springsteen, that sort of hardworking, real America, yet still kind of West Coast and just a stone's throw from New York City elitism, which Bruce Springsteen manages to do both at the same time. So this album it feels very consciously like somebody who is, the same way that, Daddy's Home was very consciously an artist, two artists at least, working together to produce something that felt like a 70s soul album. This feels very consciously like he's trying to make a River era Bruce Springsteen style album. Now I'm saying that, but it's a good album. And most people who try to sound like Bruce Springsteen sound like garbage. They don't have the songwriting talent, they don't have the taste, they don't have the sensibility. They just think they can just sort of go, oh, oh, and just get away with it. That is not a very good Bruce Springsteen impersonation. You have to forgive me. And it's funny because it really works. Bruce Springsteen does appear on one song on this album. I think he's just there to sort of give his stamp of approval for this sort of weird kind of imitation game that's going on here. But Antonoff is not a sieve. Bleachers is not a sieve. They're not just trying to make a Bruce Springsteen album. They're making an album in the style of Bruce Springsteen. And I say that, and that if I wrote that out, if I wasn't speaking, if I was writing, that's what it means to write things out. If I was writing it out, that would sound like sarcasm, in the style of. But I really think that's what it is. The biggest question that I have after listening to an entire Jack Antonoff album is, does he pull it off? Like, does he have enough charisma to be a solo artist? I think taking on the sort of talking, singing, somewhat limited range of Bruce Springsteen style works well for him. But does he really have the charisma to pull it off and make an album that you want to listen to? Thematically, it seems to go between two poles, between a breakup album, a fairly fresh breakup album, and someone who's in their middle ages trying to figure out, like, what life is, and particularly trying to figure out what the influence was of their birth family on their life. We'll see all of that when we get to the stamp. If you don't know, for every video I do a homework. I call it my stamp or my homework. I'll put a link to it up there. This is a way to listen to one song by the album. Go there, listen to it, come back, and listen to my talk. And I'm choosing the song Stop Making This Hurt. The lyrics all the way throughout this album are a wonderful combination of sort of general lyrics and very specific lyrics. But the whole thing has a universal feel to it. When I played the song in the car for my wife, we were driving to the gym, and she said, "What is this music?" This is Jack Antonoff. The Jack Antonoff? Yeah, the guy I never showed up about. Okay. I think this is either the worst thing or the best thing I've ever heard. And that's actually how I've often felt listening to Bruce Springsteen, that same way. Where you're like, it's right on that line. Like, is this cheesy and terrible, or is this really wonderful and deep? I feel that way every time I listen to Bruce Springsteen. Even Nebraska, even Darkness at the Edge of Town, even The Ghost of Tom Joad, the sort of unassailable Bruce Springsteen albums, which even the most hipster of hipsters can agree is a good piece of art. Always on that line. I think that might culturally be a New Jersey line in between the sort of banality of the suburbs and the divineness of New York City, kind of on that borderline. I don't know. But I think it's great. And especially after listening 3 or 4 times to this album, it's great. It's not the best thing I've ever heard, but it's very good. What's fascinating is the production on this album is very sloppy. We know Jack Antonoff can produce the most refined, Lover by Taylor Swift is just, it's a shining pearl of an album, right? It blinds you if you look at it too directly, because the shine on it, the gloss is so nice. But here we have a very sloppy piano, these voices in the back, kind of an echo effect on everything. It's kind of charming and wild, Maybe it's actually more like even earlier Bruce Springsteen, like the E Street Shuffle, like kind of like 70s and 80s Bruce. It all kind of feels like that. Now, I chose this song because there's a video of Jack Antonoff describing the lyrics on Genius.com. Who the hell is Jack Antonoff? How can a guy who looks like this be so unbelievably talented? A genius of production. Truly. Come at me, bro. A genius of production. He's wearing a leather jacket, like a motorcycle jacket, over a white t-shirt. These like very thick frames, intentional bedhead. To quote a great New Jersey comedian, stand-up comedian, and podcaster, Chris D'Elia, millennial. Like, this guy reeks of all the stereotypes. I half expected him to be like, "Hey, look at my tattoo. I've got a mustache." Like, he was like a parody just on how he looks. But then he talks about his lyrics, and you remember what his music is, and he's very clear in his vision. He talks about how the lyrics he's talking about are very specific. He's talking about his friend who has kids. He talks about his conversation with Lana Del Rey, who I guess he calls Jimmy. He talks about his dad, his mother, his sister, who apparently died when they were both very young. About like his mama trying to break free of New Jersey. All these very specific references that then lead in to this great anthemic chorus, "Stop Making This Hurt." What a great chorus. Stop making this hurt. It has that Bruce Springsteen quality of being a slice of Americana life, of people at the edges of society or who feel that they're at the edges of society, trying to sort of break out, but being stuck in this place and just stop making it hurt. It's really great. The bridge builds lots of energy. It's very frenetic and fun. This line, say goodbye like you mean it, all the way throughout the album, Antonoff will throw in these little lyrics that just remind you he's a great lyricist. It makes me suspicious now when I listen to other projects that he's produced. Like, is he writing all these great punchlines? Probably not, right? I still don't know. I really want to eat dinner with Jack Antonoff and just be like, so what did you do on that album? You know that part on Pay Your Way in Pain? Like, that, was that your choice or is that her choice? You know, that kind of thing. And here, it's just him, so you know it, right? Say goodbye like you mean it. And even kind of baby, baby at the end, and horns and drum lines, very Bruce-esque horns, and a great drum line all the way throughout. I'm now going to go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker than that, starting off with the first song, 91. A reference to a time when I suppose he was 6 years old. And the lyrics here are just wonderful. I'm going to read them for you. It's 91, a war is on. I watch in black and white and green. My mother dances around like there ain't no rip in the seam. She waltzes with ghosts. I can feel what went wrong. She's here, but she's not. Just like her, I'm not home. So, the first Gulf War was on TV. It was in black and white and green because it was all in night vision. And this image that he paints of his home with his mother dancing around and waltzing with ghosts, it's very unsettling, right? Like, I feel like I'm in a nice middle-class New Jersey home and I'm sitting there and the war is on and she's waltzing and she's here but she's not. And this kind of sense of suburban displacement, right? The sense of like, I'm here, but I'm not, is very powerful. And it's just a very well-written song lyrically. Musically, it's only with strings. It sounds so much like the opening to a couple of songs on the new Weezer album because it's just strings. The voices get really loud in the middle. And really his singing style is in between talking and singing, basically all the way throughout. That's good. We get to the track Chinatown, which feels very much, again, consciously like 80s Bruce. And I was trying to break it down. Like, why does it sound like Bruce? It's not just because he starts it off with the, in the beginning, and it's not just that Bruce is on there later on in the song. It's the pronounced keyboard hook. There's a thing that Bruce was able to do in the early 80s where he'd have these ridiculous hooks played on a keyboard that, like, Madonna would say was lacking in subtlety. But then the rest of the instrumentation was so rock and roll that you kind of glanced over it. That's how this feels. The whole thing, lyrically, is very Bruce, honey, jump in the coop, stuff like that. It says the title of the album, which is a great classic title for an album. Take the sadness out of Saturday Night. That sounds like a great lost 70s album. And it's nice having Bruce's voice on here, if for no other reason than just to sort of validate it, right? There's a weird sort of vocoder sound at some point after the first verse. I don't know. I sort of wish there was more of that. Then we get How Dare You Want More, which sort of comes out of nowhere. This sounds a little bit more like an Elvis Costello song, very cool drum lines, like sounds a bit more 80s. A total Clarence Clemens style saxophone from another Bruce instrumentation, like a rockin' saxophone. Rock and roll saxophone is almost always bad, except in some rare instances where it works. For the Rolling Stones, almost always, and for Bruce Springsteen quite often. In this case, it really works here. It gets to be like a party, which is nice. The album has that feeling. And it must have been interesting that he didn't choose to have it be Jack and his famous friends, because it could have been, featuring Clairo, featuring Lana Del Rey, featuring Taylor, right? It could have featured everybody, but instead it exists on its own, but it still feels like a party with your friends, and especially in a song like this, which another great line, how dare you want more? What a great line to have on the tip of your tongue, just a great lyric. It seems to be about his mother's criticism, but I'm not sure. Then the song Big Life, which you'll see my my notes here. So Bruce, it's painful. I mean, this is probably the only time I really felt like he was more aping the style as opposed to playing in it. Just starts off with, hey, it's kind of a clapping song. It's a good song, but probably the weakest on the entire album. Secret Life is funny because here it reminds me a little bit more of Bruce when he's in that earlier phase of his career, the first couple albums, imitating Bob Dylan a little bit more. I mean, a lot more personal, I think, than either Dylan or Springsteen would tend to get. But a really nice kind of like personal, like it's very Bobish, and it talks about old Russian books, and they make slight religious terms. But it's a nice idea of wanting this secret life. And I do think the Bob Dylan thing is intentional. I made a little display for you. So this is the cover of Bleachers' album. And then this is the very famous cover to Volume 2 of the Greatest Hits of Bob Dylan. This has to be intentional, right? This feeling of like, right, 3/4. I mean, that's like, come on. Sorry, I don't own the Greatest Hits of Bob Dylan because I own all of his albums. Despite what Bob Dylan fans think. But really nice on Secret Life, the vocal accompaniment, which I learned after listening to it for the first time was Lana Del Rey. So it's cool to have her sort of in the background, not in the center. Then Stop Making This Hurt, which I've already discussed. And then the song Don't Go Dark, another great lyric. Jack Antonoff is a great lyricist. Again, the image of the hipster dude with the leather coat and the frames and the hair, and the fact that he's able to write such great lyrics, it goes to show you that you can't judge a book by its black leather jacket. Bells and and horns here, again, nice kind of Bruce instrumentation, very meaningful lyrics. Don't Go Dark. I wonder, as someone who produces so many prominent artists, if this isn't about trying to stay in touch with your artists. I guess none of them are particularly self-destructive, but it must be hard dealing with people with that kind of life, with that kind of ego all the time. 45 is like the most guitar-led song, and it's interesting to reach this far in the album and really feel a guitar for the first time. I don't know what it's about. I thought it was going to be about Trump because he's the 45th president, but I don't think so. The sound is so rough. The mix and the production is just so rough. It's just great. I love it. I love the idea that one of the world's greatest producers puts out an album and sounds kind of rough. Strange Behavior, a super acoustic song, nice ooze. The voice here is the least affected, I think, on the entire album. I had a hard time figuring out exactly what is Jack Antonoff's voice. And hey, that makes sense because he works with so many different collaborators who have such a different voice. Real kind of pop sensibility in the way that the verse develops. And if you just listen to the verse, there's like a second part to the verse. And you get that sense that it's sort of like the way a pop song develops. And then a saxophone comes out of nowhere. And then it ends with the song, What Do I Do With All This Faith? Which is a really haunting and beautiful reminder of his lyrics, of his production. Starts off with a nice, warm, mournful horn arrangement. Acoustic guitar comes in. At some point, electric guitar comes out of nowhere. And it seems to be a nice, sad song about a breakup. And when I was his age, 7 years ago, whatever it was, and I went through my divorce, I remember having a similar feeling. I don't know if he's going through a divorce or just a breakup, or if this is just him imagining. I don't know. I don't know anything about his life. But it feels that way. I remember feeling so disenchanted while going through my divorce. Like I had a vision of like what love was and what life was, and I put all my faith in this person, and I had this feeling like, what do I do with all this faith? Because a relationship, a long-term relationship at least, requires so much faith. So, Jack Antonoff, how the hell are you such a good songwriter? In addition to being such a good producer? I don't know, but it's just great songwriting. And then at the very end, the final line, no faith can take your place. Just a beautiful, heartbreaking line. And just a reminder that he's not just a producer, but also a great songwriter. So there you go. There's a surprisingly emotional album. I've been thinking a lot about my mother on Bandcamp. I actually just released the album that I wrote for my mother almost 20 years ago. I never released it then. I'll put a link in the description. Kanye's releasing his album about his mother, and this album kind of feels like it's about his mother as well. and about his sister and about everyone in his family. He's able to do that, as he said in that interview, that the more specific he gets, the more universal it can be. And I just can't get that image out of my head of the mother dancing around like there's not a rip in the seam. Great songwriting, and it really kind of sticks with you. So, thank you. I've been trying to thank my Patreons more often. These are people, in addition to Milos Spasojevic, who help me buy music. I buy music with the money that you give me. That guy, I believe it's a guy, Kiro Leoniver, is the one who pointed out the mother connection between this album and the other stuff. So, anyways, thank you for commenting on that somewhere. All right, so please leave a comment. Why don't you smash the like bucket and tell me who would you most like to have dinner with in all of modern music? All right, until next time, there's the camera.